Hello everyone, I'm Todd Keisling, and I'm going to be reading from my latest novel, Nonentity, which is the final novel in my Monochrome trilogy. Big thanks to Brad for inviting me on, and I hope you like the passage I've chosen for you. A little bit of setup, I guess, is in order. So, for those of you who never read any of the Monochrome novels, it's basically about a man who wakes up one day and discovers he's disappearing. He is, in fact, transitioning into a parallel reality called the Monochrome. And I could go into a lot more, but not only would it be spoilers, it would also be kind of complicated. So, this particular section is just straight up action, and I hope it entices you to check out the books. Again, this is Nonentity, the final book of the Monochrome trilogy. Here it is. Alice hoisted herself up the decommissioned platform, dusted off her hands, and offered one to Quinn. Michael followed them, grunting as he pulled himself onto the cracked tile and paused in wonder at the decor of the old station. The tunnel opened into a series of ornate archways, each decorated in a mosaic of colored tiles. Cobweb-covered chandeliers hung between each arch, their old bulbs still giving off dim light, painting the station in the gloom of nostalgia. Their shadows stretched along the far walls like giants. Alice smiled as she took in their surroundings, relishing the old decor, silently yearning for a return to this artistic form, far removed from today's soulless, bottom-dollar design. She used to come here in her early days of imprisonment, sometimes skipping her daily meal in favor of basking in the dim light and color. Topside, the city was a lifeless grid of concrete and advertisements and exhaust fumes. Down here, she felt at home among the coloration, no matter how chipped or faded, with graffiti to brighten the cavernous room, especially the graffiti. She wasn't sure how long the other missing had been coming here to leave their messages. Surely old Dullington had known about it, although she doubted he cared about such trivial things. Let the prisoners have their little hopes, she supposed. Let them have their own wailing wall. This was less a place of pilgrimage, and more a rudimentary message board. Street addresses for places to find easy meals or clothing, the names of kind souls and the like, and more importantly, the names of others not trapped in the monochrome. The names of loved ones left behind, writ in layers of paint along the far wall. A list of names decades old stretched from one end of the station to the other. There was power here. Power in the names of those to be remembered and those to be found, they who might be contacted and asked to recall the ones they've lost. Most of the missing came here at least once in their tenure, others much more often, and if there were any left who might be tethered to the chrome, she hoped she would find them here. Quinn broke the silence. "What is this place?" "Old station that was closed 70 or 80 years ago. See the curve in the track? Modern trains can't take those turns. Too narrow." "So they just sealed this off?" Alice nodded. "Shame, isn't it? It's beautiful." "It is," Michael said. "But what are we doing here, Alice?" She walked to the foot of the terminal stairway where a neon green milk crate sat filled with cans of spray paint. "We're here to leave a message." "A message?" "Uh-huh. On the memory wall." She plucked a can of white paint from the crate and shook it. The noise of the rattling ball bearing within echoed across the station like the marching of metal feet. "People used to come here when I was trapped in the chrome, to leave messages for loved ones mostly. Hope goes a long way down here." She went to work with the paint, crafting one letter after another with enough patience to ensure they were legible. Some spots were so thick they dribbled, but the message was still clear enough, with letters so large the entire message spanned the length of the terminal. What's Donna's phone number? Michael crossed his arms, half smiling and half confused by what she was painting. For what? Why? Just trust me, please. Quinn nudged his uncle. Come on, Mike. Fine. He fished his phone from his pocket and read off the number from his contacts. Happy now? She winked at him and went back to work. When she was finished, Alice returned the can to its crate and wiped white paint on her jeans. She surveyed her work. Remember Donovan Candle? If seen, call. Quinn frowned. Who's this message for, Alice? Anyone, she said. Donovan's name is well known in the Monochrome. Anyone who comes here, well, maybe they've seen him. Maybe they know someone who has. She shrugged. It's our best shot at reaching anyone with ties to this place. Besides, if the worst happens and he flickers out forever, maybe this will help someone remember. We have to hope there's a way to break the cycle. Michael rolled his eyes and turned away. Alice followed. Where are you going? Back to the surface? Back to my car? Back to the real fucking world, Alice? Look, I know this sounds crazy, but... He spun on his heel, finger in the air, a drop of venom on his tongue. But nothing. We wasted half the goddamn day chasing dead ends. Donovan isn't down here, and leaving Donna's phone number on a wall so every crazy hobo can call her isn't a solution. Alice scoffed, gestured to the emptiness beyond the boarding platform. This is better than waiting for him to magically appear. Better than staking out a dozen stations. At least a stakeout is something productive. It's something that... Quinn cleared his throat. Guys? Makes sense? God, you haven't changed in all these years. If something doesn't make sense to you, it must be a lost cause or a waste of time. Alice saluted in mockery. Just the facts, ma'am. Unless those facts go against your accepted paradigm. No wonder you and Donovan never got along. Fuck! I'm starting to wonder... why I was going to marry you, she wanted to say, but found the words stuck in her throat. A sudden heat flushed her cheeks as she realized what she was about to say. She'd given up on ever seeing him again, made peace with that fact years ago. But when he'd appeared 2 years ago on the heels of his brother down here in the dark, a light of hope was rekindled in her heart. Staring at him now, Alice realized she needn't wonder at all. She still loved him, even if he was a stubborn bastard. Even if he never again remembered what they'd meant to one another. Somewhere across the terminal, she'd once scratched their initials into one of the tiles. It was probably coated in layers of paint now, buried beneath the hopes and dreams of others just as desperate as she'd been. But it was still there, somewhere, etched into the old stones like his name in her heart. Well, go on, mystery woman, tell me. I'm waiting. God, she hated when he did that. His snark pushed every button she had, but now, after so long, she couldn't bring herself to stay angry. She realized she was crying, wiped her eyes, and looked away. Quinn caught her eye. What is it, Q? Do you guys hear that? Alice didn't. Not at first. She was too caught up in her argument to notice anything but the aching rage in her heart, and when she finally did hear the sound, she tried to rationalize it away as something else. Something which made sense down here. The howling wind from a subway car, maybe. That didn't make sense because they were too far from the working rails. Maybe it was someone crying out from down the tunnel. Maybe... Michael tilted his head to one side, listening. It sounds like someone moaning. No, it's not that at all. Alice's words were thick in her throat, drunk from the anger and sadness. But her mind was still sober, still sharp, and the words she could not bring herself to voice raced a marathon in her head. This can't be. Not here, not possible, not possible, not possible. A thin, pale figure walked clumsily into the dim light from around the tunnel bend. Spindly legs, oh God, there's too many legs, carried an awkward torso that bubbled and churned erratically, sprouting appendages, sprouting more legs to support the creature, because it was a creature. Something Alice hadn't seen before. Something caught in the divide between monochrome and spectrum, not quite small enough to be a cretin or large enough to be the yawning. This was something in between, its existence an infection upon this reality. And even the creature seemed to share such sentiment. It peered around the dim station, confused and angered by its presence here, offended by the bright coloration of the memory wall's various messages. The impossible thing chittered in a clipped language that was no longer reversed, and the sound drove a spike of ice through Alice's gut. God, she understood parts of its speech, fragments of names and simple commands. Do not see, do not remember, do not believe, do not seek, do not speak, do not hear, do not know. Repeating in a constant hum of noise punctuated with a painful moan echoing throughout the room. What the hell is that? Michael raised his flashlight, trained the beam on the fidgeting creature. Alice made to stop him, to tell him to leave it be, but she was too late. The pale thing focused on the beam, winced from the light, and let loose a shrill cry which echoed back through the abandoned tunnels. A chorus of shrieks and whines answered its call. They watched in horror as the thing changed before them, mutating into something worse, something beyond impossible, something that should not be. Nodules on the creature's belly sprouted into more legs, accompanied with the crackling noise of snapping bones, and its head inflated to the size of a basketball. The bulbous appendage grew into a massive tumor that was little more than a pale fleshy mound filled with eyes and jagged teeth. Alice slowly reached out, put her hand on Quinn's shoulder and pulled him close. She looked at Michael, who watched in perplexed fascination as the pale thing changed before their eyes, and said in a hushed voice, "We need to move now." The creature skittered on its legs. Alice had lost count after 10, across the dead rails and walked right up the tunnel wall. It stopped halfway up the damp brickwork and to contemplate its next move, turned in place, and let loose a grating hiss when it saw them. Alice snatched the flashlight from Michael's hand, pushed him toward the platform's edge. "Run!" He almost didn't listen to her. The odd creature's mournful voice fascinated him in a way he didn't understand, and in the moments before Alice pushed him, Michael felt himself lured forward. "Do not listen." Its buzzing words echoed in his head. "Do not remember. Do not believe." A voice so familiar somehow. And he'd wanted to press forward, sit down on the tracks, listen to the strange thing sing its siren song. But now Alice was screaming in his face, urging him to run for his goddamn life, and his legs were pumping him forward. Is this happening right now? Michael's head swam, trapped in a fog he couldn't outrun, and as they raced down the narrow tunnel, he began to laugh. Am I stoned? Everything felt lighter. The pull of gravity loosened somehow, and the world around him had grown fuzzy, visually dissonant, like two overlapping images slightly askew. A shrill hiss echoed down the tunnel from somewhere behind them. Quinn shouted something, but Michael couldn't hear the boy over his own laughter. There were hands at his back, pushing him forward, and in his limp state he could do no more than follow the shaking beam of light dancing ahead. "You keep your shit together, Michael Candle, you hear me?" Alice's voice growled in his ear. Sweet Alice, he loved her more when she was angry. "Do not fucking fall apart on me now, I need you." "I need you too," he wanted to tell her, even if the thought, the words, felt so foreign and familiar. They were words he'd spoken to her before, even if he... Let me start that over. They were words he'd spoken to her before, even if he couldn't remember when, their sound and weight full of a power he wasn't yet prepared to voice. The odd fuzziness surrounding his vision began to clear, the static hum in his head dissipating and giving way to the noise of scuttling legs not far behind. Michael began to look back and Alice stopped him. "Don't," she hissed. "Try not to listen, just keep going." Silent. Michael did so, resisting the urge to turn and gaze upon the monstrosities in pursuit, because there was more than one now, more than the multi-legged thing from just a few minutes ago. The singular hiss had blossomed into a growing chorus of dissonant chatter, a pattering of tiny legs swelling into a rampant drumline. He imagined a hive of those spider things, creamy white as the moon, blind from living down here in the dark, disturbed and hungry, and so pissed off. Quinn yelped as he stumbled forward, scattering dust and stones across the old rails, and Michael knelt to lift him up. He looked back in reflex, drawn to the fury of noise following them down the tunnel, and immediately wished he hadn't. Bone white, scrambling across every inch of the tunnel's surface like giant maggots, the spidery things hissed and gargled and spat in violent anger, uttering guttural churs which might have once been words. Now they were mere ululations of rage, broken into frothing syllables, choked with a hatred that had been building for eons and now loosed upon the world. They moved erratically, gnashing teeth with 100 mouths and flailing limbs as one being, swarming toward them in a raging river of pale white. Michael yanked Quinn to his feet, pushed the boy onward, and doubled his pace. He lost track of how far they had to go before reaching the main subway line, laser focused on every step and every breath and the flames licking the inside of his lungs. How long had it been since he'd subjected his body to such physical strain? Years, maybe. 2 at least, not since he'd chased Donovan down into the dark. Another memory bubbled up to the surface, a young woman standing among a crowd of transients, staring at him from across an abandoned platform, with a sort of yearning which he didn't quite understand, which had made him uncomfortable, in fact, and now he realized he knew that face, knew it intimately. "Michael!" Alice's cry ripped him from his reverie, forced the world into focus before him. The earth rumbled underfoot. A surge of wind blew back his hair, and he realized what was happening. Train. One word, enough to ignite a blaze in his aching muscles and quicken his pace. There was Alice on the other side of the track, at the mouth of an intersection near the active station. Quinn was just ahead. He darted over the tracks and toppled into her, shouting as they collided against the grimy tunnel wall. The rumbling increased, accompanied now by a shrill whine of metal, a popping of sparks, and behind, the ravenous shrieks of something which shouldn't be. "Come on, old man, pick up the pace." Michael pushed himself, giving everything he had left to cross the gap between himself and the tunnel mouth. Each step became a labor of fire and will, as the rumbling underfoot grew more violent and the shrieking behind even louder. 3 strides now, maybe 4. Alice stared at him, wide-eyed, a stagnant breeze blowing back the hair from her shoulders and sweaty forehead. They shared something in the silent moments that followed, when time slowed and the world ceased its turn. It was just the two of them in that instant. He rushing toward her across some unseen boundary which wasn't meant to be crossed, but he'd cross it, one way or another, because she needed him to. He needed to. "Come on, Michael, don't leave me again." Her voice in his head, carried across the expanse between them and communicated by a simple gaze, and yet he heard her clearly. His whole body felt the impact of that voice, but nowhere more so than in his heart. The fire in his lungs faded, the agony of unused muscles forgotten, and with a final leap, Michael dove across the subway tracks, just as the first car reared its head into the tunnel. He collided with the wall, the impact on his shoulder and back stealing his breath as a sharp pain shot through his body. An instant later, The pale wave of ravenous things crashed into the side of the subway train. The shriek of metal filled his ears as the emergency brakes were engaged. The impact was too much, however, and the engineering car derailed at the interchange, sending sparks and clouds of dust washing over them. Panicked, his veins filled with adrenaline, Michael pushed through the pain and threw himself over Alice and Quinn. He clenched his eyes shut and braced himself against the chaos erupting around them. That was an excerpt from Nonentity, the final book of the Monochrome trilogy. First two books are called A Life Transparent and The Liminal Man. They're the first two entries in the trilogy. So again, I'm Todd Keisling. You can find my work all over the place. I'm at Todd_Keisling on Twitter. My website is toddkeisling.com. And I think that's enough times of me saying my name, so I'm going to call it. So thanks for listening. Catch you later.